Hey y'all, welcome back to Homemade Simple. If we've not met before, I'm Lori. I love to share videos each week to help you on your homemaking and frugal living journeys. I'm really glad you're here today, and I'm really excited about this week's video. It's all about simplifying sourdough to make it easy to do, easy to understand, and I'm gonna share a foolproof method of starting your sourdough starter and keeping it alive and active so that you can make wonderfully nutritious sourdough loaves for your family anytime you want. Further talking about our sourdough recipes and the things that we can make with our sourdough discard, I wanted to tell you about the sponsor for today's video. I want to thank Yushu for sponsoring the video today, and I have a lot of wonderful information to share with you about the Yushu products. Yushu is a red light therapy brand of products that tries to bring comfort and relief to people who are in pain for a lot of different ailments and discomforts. If you have never heard of red light therapy for your aches, pains, arthritis, neuropathy, and even skin conditions, I would highly suggest that you look into the treatment options that red light therapy can offer. Yushu is a company that creates red light therapeutic devices for a variety of applications. This is their red light therapy pad that uses safe and effective LED sensors to bring pain relief to a number of different parts of your body. This particular device that I have is specifically for your back, or in my case, a shoulder injury. The benefits and effectiveness of red light therapy are being studied more and more every day as people find more and more relief from all kinds of ailments such as neuropathy, arthritis, joint and muscle pain, healing of injuries in different parts of your body, and even skin conditions like rosacea, eczema, and dermatitis can be relieved by using red light therapy. You can find all sorts of different options of therapeutic devices on Yushu's website. If you suffer from ailments like arthritis or neuropathy, if you have a shoulder or a back injury, even fibromyalgia has been found to be relieved by using red light therapy. I have been diagnosed with a cyst on my shoulder, which really has caused a lot of pain in the past. This red light therapy pad that I received from Yushu has an easy Velcro strap, so it allows me to have heating relief as well as the red light therapy to provide relief to the actual joint itself to relieve pain and inflammation. I have actually wrapped my feet in this pad as well for relief for my plantar fasciitis, and when I turn this on, I can actually feel the effects of the red light therapy entering into my joint and causing a relaxation of the pain that I'm experiencing almost instantly. So using Yushu's therapeutic devices for 20 minutes a day, every day, will bring you the relief that you're looking for, and I think that you will be really impressed with the results that you find. I will post a link down in the description box below, and I will pin the link in the first comment as well. Yushu has also offered Homemade Simple viewers a 20% discount on any product that they have in their store. So if you use code HOME20, you can receive a 20% discount on any of the Yushu products that you think will be most beneficial to your particular needs. I hope that you will check out Yushu. Thank you to Yushu for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to the kitchen and start making some sourdough. First things first on any sourdough discussion is going to be creating your starter. And there are very few things that you need in creating your starter. The most important thing is a really good high quality flour. You'll either want to start with unbleached all-purpose flour, or you could start with whole wheat flour. Even rye flour is a good option. If you are looking for a gluten-free option for making your sourdough starter, King Arthur flour has this gluten-free measure for measure flour, and you can use it in exchange for the all-purpose flour that I'm going to be using, and this will create a gluten-free sourdough starter for you to use for your family's gluten-free needs. So this is available on Amazon. I will link it down in the description box below. You can also find it at Publix, and I'm sure other grocery stores have it available as well. So if you or your family needs to eat gluten-free, don't feel like you're going to be left out of the sourdough bandwagon. You can still create your own sourdough starter using this gluten-free flour. For our needs, I'm just going to use this regular all-purpose flour. So I'm going to start with adding 1 cup of all-purpose unbleached flour to a large clean mason jar. This is a wide mouth mason jar, and I would highly recommend that you use the wide mouth size of mason jar, simply because it's really difficult to find a utensil that will fit down all the way to the bottom in one of the regular mouth mason jars. So if you have access to a wide mouth jar, that's going to be the easiest one to work with. As a rule, you should never use anything metal with your sourdough starter or bread dough. The only metal thing that I ever use is this funnel, and it only comes in contact with the flour. It never comes in contact with the starter itself. I'm going to begin by adding 1 cup of this all-purpose flour, and the only other ingredient that we need is water. I use tap water. We don't have a well, and so my water is chlorinated. Chlorinated water is not good for sourdough starter. It does damage to the enzymes in the sourdough. It's going to reduce the rise, and it could do damage to the bacteria inside the sourdough that you're trying really hard to build. So if you have city water or chlorinated water of any kind, get a container and fill it up and allow that chlorine to dissipate out of the water before you use it in your sourdough starter. 24 hours is all it takes to remove the chlorine out of the water. I'm going to start with 2/3 cup of water. What we're looking for is a pancake-like dough consistency. We don't want it too thick, but we also don't want it too thin. The more you are able to work the oxygen into the sourdough, the better your result is going to be. Try to make sure that you get all of the flour from the bottom of the jar. And if it's too thick, you just add a little bit more water. If it seems too thin, just add a little bit more flour. A lot of sourdough schedules and recipes are going to call for weighing, being very exact in all of the things that you do. But when you are doing a simplified version of sourdough, all of the weighing and excessive stressing about all of the exact measurements is really not necessary. You can get a good active sourdough starter without being overly conscientious about all of the things that you do to it. As long as you have air, water, and flour, and a little bit of time, you're going to get an active sourdough starter. It may even take a good 2 to 4 weeks before you see a really good active rise out of your starter. But don't lose heart, don't give up. It's going to happen. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Here is our fed sourdough. Now we're going to cover the sourdough starter. I usually use just a paper coffee filter. I find that this is the cheapest and most effective way to keep dust and bugs out of your sourdough. If you do not cover it, gnats are going to find a way in, and it's going to destroy your starter, and you're going to have to start over. So just keeping the sourdough starter protected with this coffee filter is all you need to do. Sit it in a darker spot in your kitchen, as warm as it can be, up to about 78, 75 degrees is perfect for a sourdough starter. And every day you're going to take your sourdough down, pour out half of what you have in here, and then you're going to repeat the process. So for every feeding, Remove half of your starter. That is called your sourdough discard. Don't throw it away. We've got plenty of uses for it, and we'll go over uses later on in the video. Add 1 cup of flour and 1/3 to 2/3 cup of water. Stir it, cover it, and let it sit again. You can feed it every 12 hours, every 24 hours, or every 48 hours. But in the beginning, the more frequent the feedings, the more active the starter will become. So in the beginning, feeding your starter every 12 hours is really ideal. You are looking for your sourdough to begin a rise, doubling in size in 4 hours or less. That means that your sourdough starter is ready to use in a sourdough loaf. But the main thing is, don't allow your starter to get over hungry. If you start seeing a layer of liquid, or it looks like cloudy water on the top of your sourdough starter, that is called hooch. And the reason they call that is because that is all of the fermented liquid that has risen to the top, and it is an indication that your sourdough starter is hungry. It's an indication that you're either not feeding it enough at each feeding, or you're not feeding it as frequently as it needs to be fed. So make sure that you give a good solid feeding to the starter every 12 to 24 hours. And if you are seeing that liquid rising to the top, that's an indication that you need to adjust something about your feedings, either the frequency or the amount that you're giving at each feeding. But you don't ever want to give up on your sourdough and throw it out unless it has mold growing on the starter. That is the only time that you're ever going to want to throw away and restart your sourdough starter. So if you don't see mold, don't panic. Mold is the only thing you can't fix in sourdough. So don't worry if your starter is not as active as you want it to be, as quick as you want it to be. You just have to give it a little bit of time for it to really get going. And once your sourdough gets going and is well established, there is very little that you can do to destroy your sourdough. So just take heart, be patient, give yourself a good 2 weeks to a month to make sure that your sourdough is good and established, and you are going to be well on your way to some delicious sourdough loaves in no time. After you've fed your starter and it's become nice and active and ready to use, let's talk about how to create a traditional sourdough loaf and also a softer sandwich bread sourdough loaf that is a good alternative if you don't like the chewy texture of normal sourdough. We're going to start with 1 cup of sourdough starter and 1 1/4 cup of water. Combine these really well before we add the flour. Add 2 teaspoons of salt and 3 cups of flour. This is gonna make a very wet dough. It's not supposed to be like biscuit dough. If it's really tacky, that's what you're looking for. This is about the consistency we're looking for. Sticky, but not over wet. Just remember, this is a rustic loaf of sourdough. We are going for the sour flavor that sourdough is going to bring and all of the nutritious benefits of eating the fermented sourdough bread. So it doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to be exact measurement. So if that's why you have shied away from sourdough in the past, don't shy away from it anymore. Just give this a try, and after you practice a couple of loaves, everything is going to turn out just perfect. It will be delicious. I have been folding the sourdough a little. Now I'm going to cover it with a tea towel, set it in a warm spot, and I'm gonna let this rise. Now, a full rise is gonna be anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, but we're gonna want the bowl to be almost completely full of this risen dough. A lot of times it's really good for you to do this right before you go to bed, and then in the morning it'll be ready for you to do the next rise step. Okay, our sourdough loaf has been rising for about 4 or 5 hours. So it's gotten large enough, it's risen enough for us to go ahead and go to the second phase of the sourdough bread process. And that is going to require us to invert the sourdough loaf that has risen onto the counter, very carefully maneuver it into a ball or a loaf shape, and then we're going to put it into the proofing basket or the proofing pan. There are several options available for proofing the sourdough bread, and some of the options are these wooden proofing baskets that you've seen with the removable fabric lining. These work really well, and as long as you do a good job of putting plenty of flour into the proofing basket, it won't stick, you won't have any trouble, and it will invert into just like you need to. So no problems there. You can also just use one of these proofing baskets without the fabric liner, and be sure to put plenty of flour onto your proofing basket before you put your dough into the basket. So these two are really good options. It's what most people use when they are making those artisan looking sourdough breads. I do not have the ability to make those beautiful artisan loaves, and so what I often choose to do is just use a regular loaf pan. Your sourdough will turn out perfect if you do the second rise in a loaf pan and bake it in the loaf pan itself without inverting it a third time. This loaf pan is what I'm going to use. I get the most success using the glass loaf pan, or I even have a stoneware loaf pan that sometimes I will use. Those are going to work just as well, and they will eliminate a little bit of the pressure involved in getting the sourdough loaf out of the second rise onto your parchment paper into your Dutch oven without it sticking or losing the top of the sourdough. Sometimes that second phase of inverting the sourdough loaf is where the problem comes in. So by baking it in this glass pan and not having to invert it a third time, that's going to eliminate a lot of the risk involved in losing the second rise, and it just tends to work out better. So you can do any of these three methods. I'm going to do the regular loaf pan just because that's the one that I find the most success in. Okay, this loaf has been rising for about 5 hours. So you can see that it has grown a good bit, and now we are ready to carefully remove it from this rising bowl, form it into a nice loaf shape, and then we will put it into the pan and allow it to rise again. We want to make sure and start with a good floured surface. As long as your counter is clean, it is a perfect work surface. And do this on your counter or whatever work surface you're going to use before you begin to try to get the sourdough out of the bowl. That way it's not going to stick to the counter, because again, this is a sticky dough. I also have a dough scraper. I will link one of these from Amazon in the description box below. This is really handy. You don't have to have it, but it really makes things a lot simpler. There's a lot of different options. This is just a cheap plastic one. So I'm going to take this dough scraper and I'm going to scrape along the edge and side of the bowl to try to avoid deflating any of the rise that we have accomplished in our dough. The more careful you are with this step, the better your end result will be. So you're just going to try to be gentle. And you can see that if I was to touch this, it would completely stick to my hands. It's very sticky, very tacky, and so I don't want to cause any serious issues. So I'm going to just barely sprinkle it with flour, and I'm going to try to form it carefully into a loaf shape. I'm going to make sure that my loaf pan is nice and oiled so that there won't be any sticking when I try to release the loaf after it's cooked. Now I'm just carefully going to mold it into a loaf shape as much as possible and carefully place it into the pan. You can manipulate it a little, but you don't want to overwork this dough. Those bubbles that have formed are going to be very important, so you don't want to overwork it. I'm going to cover this back up and allow it to rise for another hour or two, and then we will bake it in a 450-degree oven. This sourdough loaf has risen about all it's going to, I think. I'm going to bake this in a 450-degree oven for about 30 minutes until it's nice and golden. Baking the sourdough loaf in the regular bread pan just tends to make it so much more moist. It still has that delicious sour flavor, but it is much more moist than the normal round sourdough loaves that you may be used to in the past. One of my very favorite sourdough loaf recipes is a soft sourdough bread. Chris always feels like regular sourdough is a little too hard and crispy and chewy for his liking, so I found this soft sourdough bread to be a great combination of a white sandwich bread and a sourdough. So to put this sourdough loaf together, we're going to start with 1 cup of active sourdough starter. Again, you don't want to use metal bowls or metal utensils if you can help it. And then to our 1 cup of sourdough starter, I'm going to add 1 3/4 cup of water. I'm going to try to incorporate that pretty well. And then I'll add 2 tablespoons of honey. You can also use maple syrup. You could use sugar. If your hands are clean, don't ever feel bad about using your hands as utensils. It just makes things simpler. 1 egg. Stir that to incorporate it. Now we can add 2 tablespoons of butter. You can also use coconut oil. 1/4 cup of dry milk powder. 2 teaspoons of salt, and 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Okay, I'm gonna stir this all together and try to incorporate it all before we begin kneading it. You know what a bread dough is supposed to look like. This is supposed to look like a regular bread dough. It's not supposed to be tacky and sticky. This is supposed to be a well-incorporated, easy to handle bread dough. So if you need a little more flour, add as much as you need until it gets to a point where you can knead it without it sticking everywhere. It's gonna depend on the wetness or dryness of your sourdough starter, so that's why you just have to sort of play it by ear a little. The 3 cups of flour and 1 3/4 cup water is sort of just to get you started. But you'll have to use your best judgment about how much is enough flour. So I added another cup. I'm gonna stick my hands in it now and see how it's incorporating. It seems like that 1 extra cup of flour is really gonna do the trick. I'm gonna incorporate it in the bowl, and then I'm gonna knead it on the counter for about 8 to 10 minutes. combined, I'm going to put this into a greased bowl, and I'm going to cover it with a towel and allow it to rise for about 2 hours. Our soft sourdough loaf has been rising for about 3 hours, I would say. It has more than doubled in size, so I think it's ready to go to the next step as well. So again, I'm going to use just this normal glass loaf pan. I'm going to grease it with a little bit of olive oil. Set that to the side, and I'll lightly dust the countertop. And then the recipe actually states that this is a 2 loaf recipe, but I always find that if I put it in 2 loaf pans, it's just actually too small, and it doesn't give that nice rise that I'm looking for. So I normally just combine it into 1. So you're gonna want to work this a little bit, but not overwork it. And I'm just shaping it into a relatively even loaf shape so that I can place it into my pan. Again, this is going to be a rather large loaf because I didn't separate it, but anytime I separate it, it doesn't rise as much as I want it to. So I'm just gonna have an extra large loaf. I'm gonna let this rise for another hour or so, and then I'm going to bake it at 350 degrees. This soft sourdough loaf just turns out delicious every single time I bake it. I know that if you make this bread, you and your family are going to love it. If the idea of healthy brownies is something that gets you super excited, I'm really happy to share this next recipe with you. Using your sourdough discard, you can make a nutritious and delicious brownie mix for your family to enjoy any night of the week. To begin this recipe, we're going to take 1/2 cup of oil. I'm gonna use coconut oil. You can use butter or any other kind of oil that you choose. And to the oil, I'm gonna add 1.5 cups of packed brown sugar. I'm gonna whisk that together until it's nice and smooth. So I'm gonna add 3 eggs, 1 tablespoon of honey, 1/4 cup water, and 1 cup of our sourdough starter discard. Whenever you feed your starter and you discard some of it so that it won't overfill the container, just store it in a mason jar, and you can use that discard for a ton of recipes, including this brownie recipe. I'm gonna mix this together until it's well blended, and then I'll add the dry ingredients. Okay, that's well incorporated. So now it's time to add our dry ingredients. We're gonna add 1 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 cup flour, 1/2 cup cocoa powder. We're gonna blend this until it's the perfect brownie consistency. And we're gonna add the last ingredient, which is 1 cup of chocolate chips. I'm gonna just stir these just until they're incorporated. Okay, and that's ready to go into a baking dish. I'll bake this at 375 for about 25 or 30 minutes, and then they will be ready to enjoy. Let me know in the comments below if you made these brownies and what your family thought about them. Well, I hope this video has been helpful to you. I have really enjoyed sharing all of these ideas about sourdough and just trying to simplify the process so that it's not overwhelming or a burden, but actually becomes a blessing to you and your family in being able to provide your family this kind of nutritious benefit from sourdough without having to follow 1,000 steps and being overwhelmed. I know that you have all of the ideas about sourdough discard, and I hope that you will share those in the comment section below. We are all here to learn from each other, and I know that you have a lot to offer from your experience with sourdough, and I hope that you will share that with everyone as well. Also, if you're interested in receiving some of my sourdough starter, check out the Patreon link down below. It will also be pinned in the comment section. I will be glad to send you some of my sourdough starter in the mail. Just be sure when you sign up for Patreon that you let me know that you are interested in receiving some of the sourdough starter. I will get it to you in the mail as soon as possible. If you would like to send a picture of your sourdough loaf success stories, I would love to see them. You can either post them on my website at myhomemadesimple.com, or you can email them to me at homemadesimplewithlori@gmail.com. I would love to see all of your beautiful creations, and I hope that you enjoy creating beautiful sourdough loaves for your family. Thank you for being here today. I hope you have a wonderful week. I love you, and I will see you again next time.